This is the first of two videos to provide an introduction to the tissues of the human body. In this video, I want to talk about epithelial tissue and connective tissue proper. I hope you remember that tissues is the second level of organization within the human body. First, you have cells, and then a tissue are similar cells that have a common function. So they all work together for one purpose. Different tissues that work together with a common function are organs, and of course, different organs can form organ systems. The study of tissues is called histology, and it's much more complicated than we're going to get into in these two short videos. There are 4 tissue types in the human body, only 4. There is epithelial tissue, which is also called epithelium, and there are 8 different cells involved in epithelial tissue. There's connective tissue, which has 19 different cell types, muscle tissue with only 3 cell types, and nervous tissue with 2 cell types. This video is going to focus primarily on these first 2 categories, and the second video picks up the rest. So epithelial tissue are closely packed cells on outer surfaces and inner linings. Their function is to provide protection for the human body, to secrete substances because it's epithelial cells that make up our glands, and to absorb substance into the human body. What's unique about epithelial tissue is that the top surface borders an open space. It might be something open to the outside, like your skin, or it can be open to the inside, like the interior of your digestive system or your circulatory system. The bottom layer of an epithelial tissue is anchored to a basement membrane. A membrane is a protein matrix that is outside of the cell, so it's sort of providing a floor for the cells to attach to. Epithelial tissue, interestingly enough, are avascular. They have no direct blood supply, and so the nutrients have to get to living cells by diffusion, moving across cell membranes up through layers, which means epithelial tissue of living epithelial tissue is not particularly thick. Epithelial tissue is classified by the shape and the number of layers found in it. So we talk about squamous, cuboidal, columnar, or transitional epithelial tissue that is found as either simple or striated. And you'll see what those words mean in a minute. I want to start with squamous epithelial tissue. That word kind of sounds like squashed, and these cells are flattened cells. They're kind of like pancakes. Simple squamous cells come in one layer. So simple denotes one layer of cells, and these are the cells that make up the alveoli in the lungs or the capillary walls, those tiniest of blood vessels. So the illustration down here is showing the squamous cells here that are making up the outside of the alveolar tissue in the lungs. Those little grape-looking clusters of air sacs in your lungs are bounded by a layer of cells that's only 1 cell thick, and it's these very thin, squashed, flattened squamous epithelial cells. When you have many layers of squamous cells, like we see here an example from your skin, then they're called stratified layers. And these stratified layers provide protection against friction because you can lose these top layers here and not affect the more important tissue. And of course, there are no blood vessels in epithelial tissue, so blood vessels and nerves are down here in the lower levels in the dermis. And so these layers, stratified squamous layers, are found in places where friction occurs throughout the first part of your digestive system as you're swallowing lumps of food down. And your skin. And interestingly enough, in the skin, as we'll talk about in the tegumentary layer, these upper layers are actually dead. They have been filled with protein. They're called keratinized, and we can lose them without really making any notice. The next shape of cells is a cubed shape epithelial cell. These are called cuboidal, and these also come in simple or stratified categories. The simple layer with the single layer is cuboidal epithelium, covers organs such as the ovaries. It lines the kidney tubules known as nephrons. They're found along the ducts of glands, the tubes that take the secretion of the gland to somewhere in the body, like the bile duct that takes bile from the liver into the small intestine. When you have stratified or multiple layers of cuboidal cells, these are ones that are often involved in producing substances that are secreted. So in the mammary glands or the sweat glands or the salivary glands and the pancreas, these are all glands that are producing something, and it's these stratified cuboidal cells that are making that something. While our cuboidal epithelium looks like little cube, short, squat cells, the columnar epithelial cells are tall and thin, like columns. And many of the columnar epithelial tissue, those cells on the top edge have cilia, which are extensions of the cell membrane that can move, and these cilia serve to propel substances along that inner opening. So we've got a illustration here of our large intestine. You can see this inner opening. And then the other type of extension from the cell membrane are microvilli, which again look like a bunch of little fingers, but the microvilli's job is not to move stuff, but to absorb stuff, which is again very important in the small intestine. So this pink layer that you see on these cells is actually where that microvilli is found. The single layer of columnar epithelium are found in places like your small and large intestine. So again, this is our intestine showing here in this diagram on the left. We have nutrients that are going to be absorbed into these cells through the microvilli. They just travel down through these columnar cells. Here's our basement membrane. And right below here, we're going to have blood vessels. And so those nutrients can move onto the rest of your body. We also see columnar epithelium in fallopian tubes, which help move the eggs from the ovary into the uterus, and your respiratory bronchioles, where you're going to be moving mucus around that has trapped any particles that have come in as you're breathing. Stratified layers are also found in the urethra and the vas deferens, part of the male reproductive system, the back of your throat, and the whites of your eye. There's another category of epithelial cell, which is called pseudo-stratified columnar. So pseudo, I think you may already know, means false. So these are only a single layer of long, tall cells, but because the nuclei are positioned at several different levels, they appear to be more than one layer. In the pseudostratified columnar cells, you often have cilia, as shown in this picture, and there are often specialized cells called goblet cells, which produce mucus. So the pseudostratified columnar cells are one of the important type of cells that line our respiratory passages to produce the mucus to trap the various particles that we inhale, and then with the cilia to kind of pass it on so that it can be sent to the stomach actually to be digested. Here's an actual microscope slide that shows those cells. Our last type of epithelial cell are transitional epithelium, and this has multiple cell layers. It's stratified, but it is a specialized type of epithelial cell because the cells can go from a cubed-shaped cell to a thin, elongated cell. And transitional epithelial is found in your urinary system. It's part of your bladder and the ureters that carry the urine from the kidneys to the bladder, and then even part of the urethra on the way out, because these tissues all need to be able to stretch. So we can see the change moving from this picture down here. You can see how these cells that were kind of short and squat in a relaxed position can actually stretch out and become long and thin, and can actually add to their cell membrane very, very quickly to make the cell larger to allow the whole organ to get bigger. So that covers epithelial tissue. What about connective tissue? Well, connective tissue, remember, contains many cell types, 19 different cell types, and there's a whole bunch of functions that connective tissue does. It provides support and protection for body organs. It holds things together. It fills in spaces. It stores fat. It protects you against infections and helps repair tissue damage. What is the same about all types of connective tissue is that there is a large extracellular matrix. So there's something outside of the cell that is not alive. This matrix just says it's a mix of stuff. And this matrix will contain some type of protein fibers, often several types, and what is known as ground substance, which is a mixture of glycoproteins and other polysaccharides, which help hold the water, so keep it a moist environment, and provide lubrication in parts of the body that have to move. This ground substance can be quite thick or more watery, depending upon what part of the body we're talking about. Connective tissue has varying degrees of vascularity, the amount of blood vessels. Most connective tissue is low in vascularity, not a lot of blood vessels, but certain ones are quite high. And overall, connective tissue makes up about 30% of your body weight. So it's really pretty important because it's taking up a third of your body weight. Within this extracellular matrix, the protein fibers come in three large types. Collagenous fibers, which are made of collagen. Those fibers are very, very strong. They can take a lot of tension. That's what tensile means. And they're really important to hold things together. So structures such as your tendons and your ligaments, tendons pull muscle and bone together, ligaments hold bone and bone together. Those will be made up primarily of collagen fibers. Then we have elastic fibers, and the main protein here is known as elastin, which is elastic. It can stretch and rebound. And so this is found in places where the body has to stretch and come back again, like your skin or in the air passages, such as in the lungs. And then the third type of fiber type you see in the extracellular matrix are reticular fibers, which are made of collagen, but they're much thinner, and they have a branch structures where the collagen over here is basically more of a straight line protein. Your reticular fibers provide the supportive network within soft organs. So they're a framework for organs such as liver or spleen or kidneys, which don't have any bones in there, but they're held together by these reticular fibers. Connective tissue itself can be divided into two categories, and so we're just going to be looking at connective tissue proper in this video. The second video talks about our specialized connective tissue. The proper connective tissue can be further divided into loose and dense, and you see we have several different types underneath that I want to go through. So looking first at loose connective tissue, and the word just kind of gives you a sense of, how is it put together, more space in between things. The first category I want to talk about is areolar connective tissue. It has a gel-like matrix which contains collagenous fibers and elastic fibers. Fibroblasts are the type of cell that produce the collagen and elastin fibers. This blast ending tells you it's a cell that builds things. In areolar tissue, you also have mast cells, which are involved in the inflammatory response, and which is very important for healing, even though we sometimes think that inflammation is something bad. And then there are many other types of white blood cells, which are there to provide protection because our areolar tissue binds the skin to underlying muscles. So it is the first line of defense if the skin happens to be broken. Areolar tissue also fills in spaces between muscles in that outer layer of your body. So as I said, it's a protection because those white blood cells provides protection along with holding everything together. This illustration tries to give a picture of what it looks like. So there's a lot of space in between things. We have these collagen fibers. We've got some smaller, reticular fibers and elastic fibers all mixed in. Here are some of your macrophages, a type of white blood cells that can move. It's phagocytic. It eats debris. It eats bacteria. Neutrophils are also part of your immune system. Plasma cells are part of your immune system. We'll be talking about those in more detail when we get to the immune system. You've got some fat cells mixed in with that especially in the areolar tissue that's found under your skin. And so it's got a lot of different things in there, but it's rather spaced out. As you can see, it's loose connective tissue. The second type of loose connective tissue I want to talk about is adipose tissue. This is your fat tissue, and the cells that are in charge of fat, or the cells that are fat cells, are called adipocytes. Remember, site here means cell, and it's not a building cell, so it's not a blast. Adipose tissue cushions our body organs. It provides insulation to help keep us warm. It's a place for storage of energy because fat is a long-term energy source. And adipose tissue also produces a particular hormone that helps suppress the appetite, so it helps keep you from overeating. That hormone's known as leptin. We'll talk about it again when we get to the hormone, the endocrine system. Fat is also found beneath the skin in what's known as the hypodermis, so below the second level of skin. The dermis is the second layer of skin. It protects your eyeballs because it rides behind your eyes and cushions your soft eyeballs from that hard, bony skull. It's found around your kidneys and your heart, again, to provide some cushioning. This slide of adipose tissue is showing you cells that are packed full of fat. The cells themselves are very stretched. These little dots over here are the nuclei, so it basically has been stretched out like a balloon, and the cell is going to be all around the outside there, holding the fats drop inside the cell itself. The next type of loose connective tissue I want to talk about is reticular tissue, and I'm sure you can guess from the name that it's basically composed of reticular fibers, so that is the protein. And there are special fibroblasts that make reticular fibers. They are made of collagen, but instead of being long and straight, you can see they're very branched here. So these are the reticular fibers just kind of all around in here. And the reticular tissue is what we find in those internal organ walls or those soft organs such as liver and spleen, and the lymphatic organs, the lymph nodes that I'm sure you've had doctors palpitate when you go in with an upper respiratory infection. So that covers the loose connective tissue. Now we'll move on to dense connective tissue. Dense connective tissue, the first type I want to talk about is known as regular. And regular dense connective tissue has tightly packed collagen fibers with some elastic fibers and a few fibroblasts in there to build all the collagen. Those fibers are in parallel. So you can see from this stained slide, here's our fibers running right next to each other in a parallel fashion. And this provides a very strong type of tissue that can flex a bit. So the parallel fibers are important for places where you have high levels of mechanical force being put on tissues. And this is where we see our tendons and ligaments. They are dense, regular connective tissue. These tissues have a poor blood supply, so healing is quite slow after damage. If you damage a tendon or you tear a ligament, it will take a long time for that part of your body to heal because there's not much blood flow, so there's not much nutrient delivery. There's also a irregular dense connective tissue. So here again, you still have densely packed collagen fibers, but they are not in parallel. They are oriented in multiple directions. So you can see all these kind of dark patches here. This is all these bundles of collagen, but they're going off in all different directions. And this is where it's important that the force is compensated for being applied in many directions. So dense, irregular connective tissue is important in the dermis of the skin, the second layer of the skin, because your skin gets pulled in all directions by your clothes, by somebody grabbing your arm, by you stretching this way and that way. Irregular dense connective tissue is also found in the membranes around muscles because, again, muscles will expand and contract in many different directions. And unlike your other types of connective tissue, the irregular dense connective tissue in your skin has a rich blood supply. So there's plenty of bleeding that happens when you open up your skin in a wound. Another type of dense connective tissue is elastic. And this is made up primarily of elastin fibers. Elastic dense connective tissue provides recoil strength when an organ is stretched, so it brings it back to its original size. Elastic dense connective tissue is found in the walls of the arteries, which are constantly stretching and expanding as a wall of blood that we call a pulse travels through it. Every time your heart beats, it pushes out a wave of blood, and arteries have to expand to let that wave through and then contract afterwards. We don't want our arteries to get stretched out, so the elastin fibers in elastic connective tissue helps bring those arteries back to the correct size. It's also found in our lung and our respiratory system because, again, we can exert some muscular force to inhale, but actually exhale is just everything springing back to kind of the ordinary place, the set point. And it's because of this elastic connective tissue that just sort of pulls everything back. So these little curvy fibers in here is the elastins. You can see how it might stretch out and then it rebounds back in, returning to this kind of scrunched up state because that's its natural preferred state. So that covers what I wanted to introduce you to with epithelial and proper connective tissue. So can you name these 4 types of tissues and describe at least one place where each type is found? I think you can guess where we find muscles and nerves. Can you describe the key functions of epithelial and connective tissue? Can you explain this naming system of connective tissue based on the shape of the cells and how many layers they are? And can you contrast what's the difference between loose connective tissue and dense connective tissue? If you're not sure, go back and watch those sections of the video again so that you're well prepared for the quiz.